Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we revisit that preseason debut in Detroit. Camille has some thoughts to share. Plus, we had a rare G League trade today involving a familiar name for the Bucks. And we get into some bold predictions as we start to see more and more of those. Camille and I will go over what we had and what Eric Name of The Athletic had for the Bucks for this upcoming season. All of that comes your way after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis, and we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. As always, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well, all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And before we get into the show, Camille, I think I mentioned it on the show last week, but use the GameTime app to secure my seats. I was hoping I would have some friends come through in the organization, maybe get me some really nice seats for the Blues and Blackhawks over the weekend, but nonetheless was able to use GameTime to get those seats and take in that game. One day after that, we had the Bucks preseason opener in Detroit against the Pistons. It was one of the stranger preseason games I can remember outside of every time the Bucks and Memphis Grizzlies play in the preseason. But there's just a number of things. I mean, first and foremost, it was an 8 o'clock Eastern time tip on a Sunday evening where I had to do like a quadruple check and even check in with members of the organization that were in Detroit of like, I'm not crazy. This is an 8 o'clock your time, 7 o'clock our time tip, right? So you had that weirdness. Then you had a quarter go the way that you hoped. If you were the Bucks, we started to see everything we thought the plan coming together for the way the team looked. Mm-hmm. Gary Trent Jr. leaves with an injury, and the wheels fall off in the second quarter.
Yeah, well, I was kind of happy the game started a little bit later because the Packers played at 3. It was a chance to be able to watch the game and then kind of ease into the Bucks. But I did have to start the Bucks game on delay. So to sum up, I think the game, like I'm watching it on delay and I'm okay. I see everybody excited in the first quarter. Second quarter, I'm not seeing as much, but I'm seeing a few tweets. Third quarter, the tweets dwindled again. I didn't see like anything during the fourth quarter. So while I'm rewatching in the third quarter, I'm in the third quarter, and I see the final like end of game score, and I was like, hold on, wait a second. It says that the Bucks end the game with 87 points. I'm like, I'm at the end of the third. They have 79 points. I was like, they score 8 points in the final quarter. That's it. So I'm watching the fourth quarter with a different lens of like, okay, well, let me see where these 8 points come from, because clearly it was a struggle. And that is exactly how I would describe the second half. Each quarter subsequently got more and more struggle buses.
There's Frank and I obviously did the post game, and you and I were talking about, well, what other takeaways are there from this? There's no statistical takeaways because cleaning, well, not only how bad it was for the Bucks, and I think it was after that 20. Let's do the quick math here. The 20-3 start that the Bucks had, they were outscored. I think 117 to 67. So minus 50 after the first 4 or 5 minutes of the game. Not the greatest. But all the stats that we reference quite a bit, cleaning the glass, they're not keeping track of anything in the preseason, so there's nothing to look at. Well, I wonder how things looked with Brooke on the floor. Did we see anything defensively? I haven't checked Second Spectrum. I assume they're in the same boat there. So it's all just eye test. And I saw a few others point this out too in the rewatch of the game. It did seem like in the first quarter plus, there's pretty good spacing for the Bucks. If there wasn't none of that just wandering around of why are we clogging up space inside the paint? Like they had really good spacing on the perimeter. We saw a little bit of flashes of Brooke Lopez doing some of the things we talked about coming out of media day as well. But all told, we're talking about probably 18 minutes of play that you would look at and say, okay, let's dig into this. The rest of it, just throw it out.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a Pistons fan who listens to Locked On Pistons, but they also listen to Locked On Bucks regularly as well. And they were like, I'm surprised that the Bucks defense actually looks this bad. I know it's preseason, but like, what's up with that? And I was like, I'm in the second quarter still. Things are still going good, but like, let me kind of keep an eye on it. And
You
it
thought,
was
oh
the
boy.
old, I was like, okay. I was like, the Bucks started missing shots. And then the Pistons started to run. And that became the story of the game. And then as starters started to sit for the Bucks, and you got more of the end of the bench guys in, then more shots were missed than that were happening before. And then the pace kept picking up for the Pistons to keep getting out and running. It was just one of those games where, like you said, it's like, what do you take away from it? Like, I've seen some people already going like, this means the Bucks should blow it up and the season is over and so on and so forth. It's the very first preseason game. Like, let's have some perspective on what this was and what this actually means for the team in itself.
And a team that has historically, at least recent history, not been great in the preseason. Like, what was the losing streak even? I think it carrying over the championship year, which they went winless in the preseason, I believe,
They
that
did
year,
that
or
year.
like and then they bookended that with I think a 1-4 and an 0-4 or an 0-5. So hasn't been pretty in the preseason for the Bucks. The point of it being, look, it's the preseason. You can be disappointed at some of the things we saw from certain guys. Come on, similar conversations we had in summer league of
Mhm.
kind of expecting to see more here, but wholesale takeaways, no. Preseason games are not the place for that. And especially on the defensive end of the floor, that I think you have to reserve that until we see Giannis on the floor. And you can see,
Yes.
okay, in an ideal world, some of the things that Doc Rivers has hinted at of maybe there's not going to be Brooke rules and Bobby rules, and we're going to do things this way, and we're going to be able to use Giannis as the ultimate helper. We can't see that if Giannis isn't on the floor. So I don't know if we'll see that on Thursday. I'm pretty sure we won't see Chris Middleton just based off everything that you can gather throughout the preseason. And we don't have any updates on Gary Trent Jr. as of this moment either. If I had to make a choice, I would assume we're not seeing Gary Trent Jr. on Thursday, and maybe not for the remainder of the preseason either.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. First preseason game of the season, get injured in the second quarter of the game, trying to go through a screen. Now, I know we were talking a bit before, and some people have speculated that the injury happened a little bit before that play and that going through the screen kind of exaggerated it. But we'll see over the next coming days. I know today, as we record on Tuesday the 7th, the Bucks didn't have practice or anything, so there was no public media for an update. So hopefully Wednesday, we're able to get an update on the health status of Gary Trent Jr. And hopefully it's nothing that's going to keep him out of the game too long. I was hoping initially, like maybe it's just a stinger or something like that for
Yeah.
him. Again, it's speculation at this point, but all we can do is hope something too serious, because I mean, although of all of the starters on the team who you'd be like, okay, we could probably weather being without him, not having Gary Trent Jr. is a big blow. And you saw it early, just the quick trigger that he has when he's gets the ball in rhythm. He's not afraid to shoot the ball, made that three, made a tough floater layup situation too at the rim. So you hope it's not that he's not out too long, and especially because you're also building chemistry with him being entered into that lineup as well. So we'll keep our ears to the streets and, of course, update everybody as soon as we know more about the status of Gary Trent Jr.
A Gary Trent Jr. absence opens the door for presumably one of the young players. Frank and I talked about that a little bit on the post-game show Sunday night, Monday morning, but we'll get into some of those thoughts. And I would expect we'll at least hear something. It may not be a clear update on Gary Trent Jr., but as you and I record this Monday night, the Bucks are going to practice on Tuesday and have media availability at around 12:30 or 1. So we'll hear something, even if it's just a no update yet on Gary Trent Jr. But I would look around 1 o'clock for news to start to trickle out there on his status going forward. So if he is out, who does that open the door for? What is this trade that the Wisconsin Herd pulled off? Doesn't mean a former Buck is coming back to Milwaukee. And those bold predictions that we promised. Camille and I will get to that coming up after this on Locked On Bucks. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed. Doesn't even have to win $200 in bonus bets. All you have to do is place your first $5 bet. Get started today at FanDuel.com. Head over to that site, FanDuel.com. So, Camille, if Gary Trent Jr. is going to miss time, I think, well, now I'm trying to remember and put words in Frank's mouth, but I think what we kind of aligned on was I would assume it means AJ Green. Just the way that we heard Doc Rivers talk him up throughout the offseason, and Doc Rivers and John Horst, and dating back to media day as well, we heard AJ was great. AJ had a great offseason. You guys didn't see it, but we believe in him. What we saw last year as well, and just the growth that we saw from him. I know Pat Connaughton started. I know that at least was a talking point for portions of the fan base of the Bucks, but I'm left to assume if Gary Trent Jr. is going to miss, let's say, a handful of games, AJ Green's the guy that slides in there in the starting lineup.
That would make a lot of sense. As you mentioned, he is somebody who was talked about during the offseason a bit. Like, hey, we've been seeing the game. Like, trust us. Like, it's improving. We're impressed. We like where he is right now. DeLon Wright, another name you could throw in there if you want to go with somebody with a little bit more experience as well. Seeing him in his first preseason action as a Milwaukee Buck, the hands, the deflections, and everything like that were really quick. Some of the offensive decision making had me just kind of be a little puzzled at times. Like there was one play where he drew two, and instead of kicking it back out to Bobby, who at that point was hot, he went up on two guys and luckily got fouled in the process. But it was one of those things like, not sure that was the best decision. But again, preseason, hard to make a lot of anything, and it's a one game sample size and an exhibition at that. So I'm not going to lean too heavily into that. But DeLon Wright's another option I could see out there, especially if you want to lean more into like that defensive identity, just given the fact of what he can do. So I would think him or AJ, or I mean, what if it's Pat Connaughton? What if it is Pat Connaughton coming in that starting role? Because he has some more familiarity with Doc Rivers and they've developed some level of trust over the last year as well. It could be Pat.
Let's just get into the bold predictions right now. Since you bring up,
is it that Pat Connaughton is going to be a starter?
No. Look, it's a preseason game, and just as we had warned you, don't take too much away from this. When it works for Pat Connaughton, and I should be careful here because I'm by no means saying Pat Connaughton needs to start and Pat Connaughton X, Y, and Z here. When it works, you see the value that he brings. And the one thing especially that he brings that you don't see a whole lot of on this team is movement without the ball, cutting around the basket. We saw a couple of those instances in the game the other day. I just think the groundswell of the opposite of support for Pat Connaughton that we've seen with a number of Bucks fans. And again, he did not have a good year last year. I'm not trying to say that he did and defend the argument in that sense. I just think things are lined up for a bounce back year. If for no other reason than can it be worse than it looked last year for him and a number of guys? So that's not to say Pat Connaughton is going to be a 40% three-point shooter and going to score X amount of points. It's just going to say, look, maybe it's the version of Pat Connaughton that we saw early in his Bucks tenure where he had some of those impactful plays, granted not a very high volume of them, and you were able to pick your spots with him a lot more. But I'm inclined to think that's the version of Pat Connaughton we're going to get. Maybe not peak Pat when you think about 2021 and the bubble year as well. And oh, by the way, he was pretty good in the playoffs a couple of years ago too. But I do think it's going to be closer to the first 2 years of Pat Connaughton. I mean, you think back to the impact that he had in that series against the Boston Celtics in Bud's first year, where he was one of the big impact guys off the bench in a role-playing sense. I think it's going to be closer to that than it was what we saw last year, or than it is what we saw last year.
I mean, if Pat Connaughton comes into this season and he shoots above 35% from three, that is already an improvement, because the three-point shooting is something from Pat Connaughton over the last couple of seasons that we've seen trend down a bit. So, I mean, that was part of the game that also kept him on the floor. In addition to him being able to move really well off ball, it was just the ability to knock down those open shots, those threes, those timely threes when you get opportunity to. So if Pat can do that, in addition to the cutting, if the lateral movement isn't, completely sat from, if we see him out there moving defensively as well, like I could see it with everything that you're talking about, with not necessarily a Pat Connaughton like renaissance or anything like that, but him being a productive player for the Bucks this upcoming season. Like there's a pathway to that, and I can see it. And for me, like the first thing, in addition to him moving off the ball, which we know he's good at, is just seeing that 3-point shot fall, because we saw it last night in the first preseason game where he was able to put some pressure on the basket, use that leverage, kick out, get an open three for a teammate. So like we can see more of that from Pat. I definitely see it. But if you want to go with somebody who has like a higher ceiling from three, if you're looking for spacing in that situation, then laying on the AJ Green, someone who shot, 40% from three. But if you want to go that defensive route, you have Wright, which to this end, like I like the fact that the Bucks would have some options of different types of guys to fill in that position, where last year it felt like you didn't have that many different options of types of players. So I do like the fact that there are various options that can take the roster or the lineup in a few different ways, depending on which way you go.
All right, let's stick with this for a second. So what letter grade would you assign to Pat Connaughton for his play last year?
Last year, I'd probably give him a C, maybe a C minus, somewhere in there.
I was expecting lower, honestly, because I was going to say
it wasn't as bad as certain guys who we expected more from, but it was disappointing.
I would guess if we put the poll out there, and I suppose leave your thoughts in the comments. If we asked all the listeners here and Bucks fans, it would be like you'd probably see a lot of D minus and worse, but probably a D plus, somewhere around there. If you get a C plus season from him, perfect. That's, you pick your spots, you find the spots that work and the matchups that work. And if you get a C plus season, I think you would absolutely love that. And I think there's a chance you can get that. If we say that Gary Trent Jr. is going to miss the start of the season, and let's just throw a number out there, reckless speculation. Let's say he misses the first 10 games of the season. We went through Delon Wright, we went through AJ Green, we mentioned Pat Connaughton, but is there anybody else that you could really see starting in those games that early in the season?
Ooh, I mean, the only other names I would really go to is like Marjan and Andre at that point.
And that's what I was getting to. Like, do you think that's a viable option?
Those two. And again, we've talked about Marjan's performance over the summer, things that he needs to work on in his game in order to be somebody who is going to be a rotational piece consistently for this Milwaukee Bucks team, which includes his decision-making, needing that to be quicker, and just his ability to go out there and play some defense. And I will say, of all of the bad things that we saw in the preseason game, Marjan had a few defensive plays that stood out. He was active with his hands. There was a play where he tried a midi, like a pull-up midi. He missed. The Pistons were off the other way, and he did not give up on the play, got behind Holland, poked the ball away. It was off on Holland. The ball comes back to the Bucks. Little things like that from Marjan were encouraging, especially after a performance from Andre where it was kind of like he seemed out of sorts a bit. And that could be a reflection of the lineup and the players that he was playing with on the court. We've talked about his game in particular and how his game tends to look better when you place him around the other starters and other guys who can really go and get their bucket. So it could be a last shot for Marjan. You might see him start a couple of them as well, just to see what it looks like for him. It could be Andre Jackson Jr. as well, if you want to lean more into that defense, because again, I do think his game tends to fit better when you put him around the starters. I think you and Frank were mentioning that last night as well, where that's part of what the preseason trying to figure things out makes it difficult, because the lineups that you're seeing are lineups that you will not see in the regular season.
Yeah. Some interesting numbers to get to for Pat Connaughton is if we stick with this and saying, I don't know how this became the Pat Connaughton episode, I swear. But if we stick with that, we do have the bold prediction that I mentioned from Eric Name and some other interesting ones that were tossed out there from the staff of The Athletic. Also a late breaking, not free agent, but extension signing that we see in the Eastern Conference we'll get to. And that trade that we referenced earlier that the Wisconsin Herd pulled off, we'll explain what it actually means, because I think there was a lot of, wait, what? As soon as you saw this. So what is this trade actually doing for both parties? We'll get into that coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you now about our friends over at GameTime. And you heard me mention I just used GameTime to secure my seats to see that preseason hockey tilt at Fiserv Forum between the St. Louis Blues and that other team from Chicago. But GameTime really is the number one app for you to secure all of your ticketing needs, not just sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it. GameTime has it all. A lot of features that GameTime offers that you don't find elsewhere. You can get a panoramic view from your seats in the app before you buy your tickets. You can toggle on the feature for all-in pricing to show you the total upfront cost right there within the app. No surprise and sticker shock with fees once you get to checkout. This comes with the lowest price guarantee. Well, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference for those seats if you can find them cheaper elsewhere. And best of all, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download the GameTime app now. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, to get $20 off your first purchase. Download GameTime today. What time is it? GameTime. All right, so I'm pretty sure and we don't need to spend a ton of time on Pat Connaughton to just finish the point. I think we did this earlier in the summer, but last year he shot 35% on his threes. The year prior to that, it was 34%. It was the peak years, the championship year and the year after, when he shot 37% and basically 40% from three in those 2 years. Also played a lot more minutes those 2 years. It was down to 22 minutes a game last year. His first year in Milwaukee, we saw the minutes up to about 21, not quite as many 3-point attempts or the high percentage. That seemed to really develop, and it peaked the year after the Bucks won the title, and he was taking about 6 threes per game. It was more of the impact hustle role player type of plays that you saw from Pat Connaughton early in his stay here. But when I say I think we can get him to a C+, to me, that is somewhere in between 2021 and what you saw 2 years ago for him. So if you can get the 3-point percentage to 35% consistently there, doesn't have to take the high volume anymore. We saw that come down last year when you had Malik Beasley and Damian Lillard, and you factor in Gary Trent Jr., basically, we think, replacing Malik Beasley in that volume, but also the fact that we heard Doc Rivers hint at it's not just going to be bombing away threes. We saw a lot of spacing in that preseason debut against the Pistons, but you get the sense some of those things, like cutting to the basket, are going to be important. And that's, I mean, to be clear, it's always important, but it's going to be more important within what they're looking to do this season. And that's where I've kind of come down on, yeah, I mean, I think it is going to be a bounce back year for him. If for no other reason than, again, can't get much worse than it was last year. And I'm always inclined to, when everybody's going one way, you know what, let me take a look at what's going on over here. So that's kind of where I'm at with Pat Connaughton.
No, I get you on that. Like that's why I was like initially like a C minus feels right for me how I grade him from last season. But I would say this is one of those like if it was one of those tests that you studied for and I feel really good about it, and then the teacher's coming back around with the paper and they hand you the paper upside down and you're like, uh-oh, and then you turn it over and you're like C minus. Like what I thought I aced this test. That's how that's how I felt about Pat Connaughton last season, where you got used to what he was able to bring to the table as someone you can count on as a consistent role player. So yeah, if that 3-point percentage comes up a bit for him, if he is able to cut and help make that offense more dynamic, and if he's able to, keep doing what he needs to do off or defensively as well, at least within the team context, like I said, there's a pathway for sure for Pat to play well, and it would behoove all Bucks fans to hope for a good year from Pat Connaughton because it would help the team. But if there are people who are like, nah, I'm off the Pat Connaughton bandwagon, like I'm here for whatever the new thing is, AJ Green, Marjan, DeLon Wright, whatever it is, I also couldn't be like, well, you're wrong because I get why you're at that point as well.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see for Pat Connaughton this year. I hope he has a bounce back because again, that would be good for the Bucks, even if not for on court, for trade value as well as an asset. So, I'm here for it.
I am by no means trying to urge anybody else to buy up the Pat Connaughton stock. To that last point you made, if you're out on him, I get it. But I just think I think there's signs, and I think there's a path for him to have this bounce back season for the team this year. We mentioned bold predictions, though. I'm not really married to my bold prediction being, hey, Pat Connaughton's going to be really good. But The Athletic, their staff just put together a piece the other day that came out, I think Monday, on bold predictions for each team that their respective writers cover what to expect for the season. And of course, our own Eric Name, his bold prediction, I think he kind of ran into what I did when we did the Brew Hoop piece earlier over the summer of what's your bold prediction for the team, and thinking, you know what? I haven't really thought about that. What is a bold prediction for this team? Eric came down with Giannis will win his third MVP and pointed to, look, here's what he did last year. Here's the case for it. We think this partnership, everything that we heard at Media Day with Damian Lillard, it's really going to work this year. And they've ironed out a lot of that chemistry. So again, there's the signs that exist, and an easy way to talk yourself into, look how good he was last year. We think, similar to the Pat Connaughton conversation, can't be much worse than it was last year for the Bucks. We think it's going to be better. And the caveat that Eric added too was, assuming the Bucks are challenging for one of the top 2 seeds in the Eastern Conference, because ultimately that's what's going to determine it. If the Bucks finish 4th or 5th, doesn't matter what Giannis does. He could average 50 points. He's probably not winning the MVP.
Yeah, and someone might hear that and be like, Giannis winning MVP isn't bold. Like, what are you talking about? He's Giannis.
Right.
Like, he's consistently in the conversation. You see him in the top 5 of MVP voting every year since he won his last one. When he finished 4th, 3rd, and then 4th again over the last 4 years. So you can be like, it's not bold. But when you think about it, like, yeah, I would say that qualifies as a bold prediction, because when you think about the MVP conversation, we've mentioned it before. Part of it is narrative. Part of it kind of feels a little bit like, whose turn is it? How is this setting up to go? And for Giannis, like the story isn't there. It's a Bucks team that's been a disappointment the last 2 years. It's a Bucks team that a lot of attention was on the fact that Damian Lillard is here. You have some other young players ascending in the league right now as well, with like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander with the Thunder. You have someone like Luka, who finally made it to the finals, had a really good year. Could be a year where he finally breaks through as well. And then, of course, you still have like the stalwarts of Jokic and Embiid, although Embiid might not play enough minutes this year to qualify for that in the first place. So when you think about the landscape as well as the Bucks and how the argument of you have 2 superstars, how can one win MVP? Like, if the Bucks finish as a top 2 seed, I would bet some money that Giannis's numbers are looking really, really good, because as we mentioned last year, he is just really consistent in what he does. I mean, last year, the fact that he was able to average 30 points, shooting over 60% from the field, first time in NBA history, and he still finished 4th in MVP voting. Like, it's one of those things, like the team success has to be there as well for the Bucks. So if anything, I think the bold prediction, it would be the Bucks finish with a top 2 seed in the East this year.
Yeah, I mean that's I suppose the big thing is looking at team projections for the Bucks versus individual players. I mean, if you wanted to get really bold, it's especially if you loved what you saw in the first quarter. I think the boldest of predictions is Damian Lillard wins the MVP, or Damian Lillard finishes with a higher scoring average than Giannis does this season. Some interesting ones, just to wrap this portion of the conversation up. In the Central Division, where Darnell Mayberry, his prediction was the Bulls will make the play-in, which on the surface may not seem bold because Chicago Bulls and play-in tournament, I mean, it's like peanut butter and jelly, how much it goes together recently. But the expectations are not quite as high. And I think especially coming into the season, we assumed, well, Zach LaVine will be traded. He hasn't been. And Lonzo Ball is expected to be ready for the start of the season. So all of a sudden, that one seems like, I don't know about bold, but it does kind of make sense there. For the Cavs, Joe Varden had, one of their main four core players will be traded. And
Yeah, that
it
must
won't
be
be
out.
Donovan Mitchell. Yeah. So either Jared Allen, Darius Garland, or Evan Mobley, one of those four being moved. And what about this one? The last one to touch on, Camille. The Detroit Pistons from James Edwards, who is now covering the Knicks. So his going away gift to the city of Detroit was Pistons will make the play-in tournament.
I am not mad at that. Like, as I was watching the preseason game, like, I had the thought where I was like, I think the Pistons are going to get their most wins since the 2018-19 season when they went 41-41 and finished 8th in the East. I mean, their over-under is 25.5. So, like, even if they came under their projected win total there, they could still win more games than they have since 2018 because they just have not been good over the last 5 years. So, in order for them to do that, they just need to win 24 games. They can win 24 games in my opinion. So, like, for me, I think we're going to have the best Piston season since they last made the playoffs. And in the East, could be good enough for a play-in spot.
Yeah, it's look, the bottom 5 in the East is going to be fascinating just to
Yeah.
see who's the one that crawls to the top of that and gets the 10 seed and the final play-in tournament spot. Couple other quick pieces of news before we touch on that Wisconsin Herd trade and what it means in actuality for the Bucks and the Herd. Shams Charania is the replacement for Woj, as that was reported late in the afternoon on Monday. I think that's what a lot of people were assuming at the time, that he would eventually make the jump to ESPN, but it becomes official. And I mentioned there was a extension that was agreed to Monday evening. The Magic have locked up Wendell Carter to a 3-year extension. So Orlando just hoarding centers.
Is that a surprise at this point? But no, it's cool to see Wendell Carter get that contract there. He was a name that was brought up a lot. I know we talked about him as a possible trade target for the Bucks and just around the league as well. So seeing him get that contract in Orlando, you would think like he can kind of settle down there. And again, they have a lot of centers there. They have a lot of size over there in Orlando. If they can just find some consistent 3-point shooting, they are going to be a problem for quite a few teams this year.
All right. So there was 2 moves the Wisconsin Herd made on Monday. They acquired the returning player rights to a guy that Frank and I talked about a little bit on the postgame, Liam Robbins from the Birmingham Squadron. They sent over the player rights to Marquise Chris in exchange for Liam Robbins. But the big one that I think caught a lot of people's attention and caused everybody to do the Rock's people's eyebrow was when you saw this come through, that the Wisconsin Herd had acquired Sam Merrill in exchange for a 2nd-round pick in the G League draft and Elijah Hughes, the rights to him. So I think our friend Ty of the Eurostep broke it down as well. But basically, to explain it, the Bucks are not getting Sam Merrill. It's basically a gamble of, I think it more speaks to whether or not Elijah Hughes is going to be playing overseas or playing in the G League. But it's more, all right, we'll give you the rights to this player and a draft pick, and it's essentially banking on, I don't know if Sam Merrill sticks around the whole time. Like, I don't know if he's going to be on that roster the entire time, and if he becomes clear and ends up in the G League, we then have his rights. So this does not mean, could the Bucks get Sam Merrill, or is he a member of the herd? No, the Cavaliers would need to release him or renounce him first, and then he would need to sign in the G League, and the herd would have his rights. So there's a lot of things that would have to go in motion. So unfortunately, this wasn't a Gary Trent Jr.'s injured, because I think that's where a lot of people's minds race to. Gary Trent Jr. goes down, and the Bucks just traded for Sam Merrill.
Yeah, it seemed like they just want to kind of get a draft pick and a chance if things don't work out with Merrill and the Cavaliers, because he's a Cleveland Cavalier right now. But if there comes a day where he is no longer signed to that NBA contract, then, the Bucks have the G League rights on him. He can be a Wisconsin herd member, so on and so forth. But
if he's traded, as we just said, Joe Varden said, hey, somebody's going to be traded. If there's a blockbuster trade, you're also, there's a different coach there now, so maybe they don't view him the same way. So it's more the gamble on that. Yeah.
But again, he's another guy who has an NBA skill set with shooting that rock. So we'll see how it goes. But it's just the Bucks taking a chance in case something happens. So it's nothing at this moment to really look into. But if he's no longer a Cavalier, or he's no longer on an NBA contract, then it's going to be kind of interesting.
As we close here, would you say, though, do the Bucks already have Sam Merrill at home? Would it just be he and AJ Green pointing to each other in the Spider-Man meme?
Low key, yeah, we could definitely say we got Sam Merrill at home. You can definitely go at it with that one.
All right, so we do expect to have some update. It may be vague, it may not be descriptive, it may just be we don't know, but we'll hear something. I shouldn't say update. We'll hear something about Gary Trent Jr. Tomorrow, later today, as you listening to this, I would assume around 1:00 after the Bucks have their media session and wrap up their practice. We're already headed towards preseason game number 2. Also curious to see if we get a chance to see LeBron and Bronny on the floor together in Milwaukee, or if one of those two doesn't make the trip or doesn't play in that game. And if we just get more than 18 minutes of solid play from the Bucks in that game.
Hopefully we do, because that was a tough watch. That was a tough, even with all of the thirstiness of wanting to see Bucks basketball after a long off season, that second half was rough, especially once you got into the fourth quarter. So hopefully at least we get some fun basketball on Thursday against the Lakers.
Here's hoping to that. So stay peeled for any updates on Gary Trent Jr. and what that would mean for the Bucks. Leave your thoughts in the comments as well about the bold predictions. Do you have one for the Bucks? That was something that we didn't touch on for this team this upcoming season. You can leave your letter grades for Pat Connaughton last year as well. I think I know where we're headed with that, but go ahead and leave those as well. Apologies for the mic earlier in the show too, is who knows what went on with it, but we got it fixed. So that'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.